Filthy Animals is an ecology podcast for adults. Episodes may contain strong language and graphic descriptions of natural phenomena. A more detailed list of content warnings is included in the episode description.
Welcome to Filthy Animals, a sex, drugs, and ecology podcast where science educators talk about the unusual adult activities of the natural world that we believe you need to know about. Every month, we'll expose you to the latest research on all the filthy topics your high school science teacher was too embarrassed to talk about. I'm Nicole.
I'm Alan.
And I'm Rachel. And
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Greetings.
And today,
Yes.
we are going to be talking about a subject that is exclusive to mammals.
Oh?
Yes.
You're 100% positive.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it involves body parts that only mammals have.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool.
Is it
Fair.
ingrown hairs?
Oh my God, I saw a video the other day that somebody, if you pluck your nose hairs, your nose hairs can grow back ingrown in such a way that they pop back out on the surface of your nose. So like there was somebody who said like she was like, I have been plucking my nose hair so I can pop those little pimples I get inside my nose. And then I was getting like weird pimples on the surface of my nose, and I popped them and there was a black hair in there, and I pulled it out and it was a nose hair.
So they just
And her
start
doctor
tunneling
was like,
through the other side of your nose.
Yeah. And her
That makes
doctor was
sense. It's
like,
very
"That
thin
happens."
there.
Yeah.
It's very thin.
So that is a unique problem to mammals for sure.
Okay, yeah.
Today's episode is also unique to mammals. We are going to be talking about what happens to embryos and the different ways that females have reproductive control, which is sort of it makes it sound like there's conscious decisions being made when it's really more like, body systems being put in place to manage reproduction. But I do want to just at the head of the episode say that this topic will include discussions about pregnancy loss, miscarriage, spontaneous abortion. So if that sounds like a topic that you're not interested in hearing about, that's totally fine. Just skip this episode. We'll see you another time. We will also put a timestamp in the description of when that discussion starts. I think it's like the last third of the episode probably. So just letting you know that. We are going to be specifically talking about what occurs out in nature. Obviously, the human experience of pregnancy loss is a totally different topic and not at all what any of this research is about. So it's going to be a pretty factual look at what is happening in the placental and marsupial uterus world.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Take us to the uterus world, Rachel.
All right. Close your eyes.
Okay.
Oh, God.
Picture the warm embrace of a uterus. You're a little collection of cells, maybe 70 to 100 cells. You're floating around and you're like, whoa, hang on, there's no place for me to go. I guess I will just stay on ice until some other time. I'm just going to float around in here. This is just, I don't have anywhere to be. I don't have anywhere to go. Just a little guy just floating around. There's a lot of weird things that happen inside uteruses with pregnancies. For most mammals, fertilization happens within like a couple hours of insemination. So, sperm, egg, boom, baby thing. There's a lot of different stages.
That's the way I learned it.
There's a lot of different stages, like blastocyst. Ooh, that's when it's like a little ball of cells versus fetus and embryo and all these different terms. So, basically the egg in most mammals, the egg then becomes implanted in the uterus and development continues until birth. And that's pretty straightforward. But there are a lot of cases in mammals that have like quote unquote modifications to that process. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. So there's a lot of ways this can look like. The first type of delay or like modification to this pregnancy process is pretty straightforward. It's called delayed ovulation. And this is something that I've only seen in bats. It's pretty common in the families Vespertilionidae, which is like North American bats, and Rhinolophidae. Let me try that again. Rhinolophidae. You can just leave the whole thing in there. And basically, these are bats that, for the most part, live in temperate climates, which means they hibernate. So it's hypothesized that that is why they have a weird modification to their pregnancy. Basically, they all have sex in September or October. And then during hibernation, they keep the sperm in storage, basically. It's completely immobile. It just hangs out in the uterus or the vagina. And then in spring, they finally ovulate, and then the sperm become mobile again, and then boom, 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 you got a baby.
Amazing.
Is that
boom, boom, boom.
I want to say, that is like the second time that we've used the phrase boom, 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 we've got a baby in this episode. Am I wrong about that?
I think that was the first time. The first time it was egg, sperm,
oh, boom,
something.
Boom. It's
maybe just one boom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to increase the number of booms as we go along.
No, it's fine. But that makes sense, right? Because these are like Vespertilionidae, they're exclusively insectivorous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. So
you don't want to be having a baby when there's no food.
Exactly. And that basically ensures that the babies are being born in early summer, which is like the peak of bugs coming out. So there's plenty of food available. Yeah. Although noteworthy, mammalogists have found sperm stored in tropical bats that don't go through hibernation. So they're still thinking in that case, it's probably about food availability because it's, coming out when the fruit are most available, etc.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's another one of those things where it's like the phenology of it is so delicately timed that there are potentially horrifying consequences for that,
With climate change?
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
But we won't think about that right now.
No, and like we'll get into this more with other types of weird, blastocysts on ice, basically. But some of these things seem to be triggered by the environment. So in some cases, but I'm sure not all cases, it might just be that the reproductive cycles will adjust themselves to whatever the climactic conditions are. But that's probably not true across the board, because it's not well understood what's triggering these different developmental delays in embryos or, fertilization at all. Yeah.
This is something that that acclimates within the individual, or is it more specifically evolved?
It depends on the species, and it depends on the type of reproductive modification. I hate using that word, but it's so variable that there's a lot of different ways it looks anyway. Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's all I have to say about delayed fertilization. That's pretty straightforward.
Great.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Another type of delay in having a baby, boom, 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 is called delayed development. And this is another specifically weird bat thing. I only saw examples of this in bats. And basically the blastocyst, which is the bundle of cells portion of development of the young, implants like normal during the summer when, they've had sex. So yeah. But then it might have a 7-month period of delayed development. So it's not just a long gestational period. The embryo literally pauses delay, and it might be growing a little bit, but we're talking it grew from 200 microns to 500 microns, very, very limited growth. And then boom, as a certain trigger happens and suddenly the embryo develops. So an example of this is Fisher's pygmy fruit bats, which this study on them was in the Philippines. And they found that the length of delay in development could be 8 months long. These bats would be impregnated in June, and then it wasn't until next March that the developmental rate finally blew up, and those embryos would finish developing in 3 months. So this 8-month delay means that their total gestation is 11 and a half months, which is the longest known in bats. But most of that time, the blastocyst is barely growing at all. It's completely paused, and then and then it rapidly grows in 3 months.
Gotcha.
Interesting. And that is also, I mean, a food availability, resource availability thing?
Oh, yeah, probably.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
these are fruit-eating bats, and so it's really timed with the emergence of large fruits. And what makes this more interesting is that females who have never given birth, so they are the first of that, they are females produced that year, basically. They're like young females.
Mm-hmm.
Fun fact, the scientific word for this is nulliparous because they haven't given birth. Paris means like birth related, yeah. So these bats would get pregnant at like 3 to 5 months old, and then embryos would enter a similar delay that also stopped in March or April. So basically, like, these young were born that year. They had sex much later in the year, obviously. And then after only 2 to 6 months of delay, they would start developing their young, so that basically the birth was synchronized with the rest of the colony with a shorter delay in development. So that's kind of cool that they can synchronize with the rest of the colony. It seems like there's some other factor triggering what's happening. It's not just like a biological clock that always goes off after like 7 to 8 months. So yeah, and we just don't know what signals are causing that.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, that is really, really interesting. That's not just literally a timing thing. Well, it's a timing thing, but it's not like based on a specific set of months.
Yeah. And it seems like with these bats that have this, synchronizing the births across the entire colony is really common. So like the Jamaican fruit bat, it will synchronize its birth at the end of the dry season when large fruits are most abundant. And with other bats, it'll be related to the unpredictability of insects showing up. But it's pretty common that no matter what's triggering or, potentially triggering the development of the babies, the whole colony will experience it at the same time, no matter what.
Well, and like within some species of bats, there is like almost like a colonial maternal care, right?
Yeah.
Like there is like it is more, it's like a shared responsibility to an effect amongst like the various mothers in a certain bat colony.
Yeah, that can be true for sure.
Yeah. But that's not like a blanket thing, but yeah, that would make sense if you were trying to like, we're all going to line up our development at the same time, and so we all, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. As a bat, it's advantageous to have all your pups together with all your friends.
Pups.
Another form of this sort of reproductive control comes in the form of delayed implantation, which I kind of described to you in the beginning. In delayed implantation, the pregnancy happens like normal, but the blastocyst gets frozen in suspended animation, floating around the reproductive tract until the uterus environment becomes better for implantation. So, while it's free floating, the blastocyst has this protective coat, and eventually when like the location where it can implant develops and it's like, oh, okay, there's a nice little cozy spot to land, it implants and then proceeds like normal. Yep. This is actually way, way, way more common in the animal world, and it can be both facultative and obligate, which basically means sometimes the delay is a normal, consistent part of the reproductive cycle. That's like in armadillos would be a good example. But sometimes it's triggered by environmental factors, like a mouse that's still nursing a litter, or environmental conditions being too extreme that can cause an onset of delayed implantation. So they're always having like their mating seasons and having sex at the same time of the year. But if it's just a really bad year or they still have a litter or whatever, they can delay that embryo even getting implanted in the first place.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, unlike the last couple of examples, this happens in a lot of different animals: insectivores, rodents, bears, mustelids, seals, armadillos, some bats again, roe deer, black bear, etc. And in pinnipeds, so like seals, walruses, those weird guys that are like dolphin shaped. but like seals, I guess seal shaped would be, you know, those guys.
Yeah. Seals.
Most people have a visual reference for what a seal is, Rachel.
I don't know why.
It's like they're like a dog, but they're dolphin shaped.
Look, I don't know, man. I'm
That's fine.
trying.
You're
I'm
doing
not
great.
a marine
You're doing
biologist. We don't have oceans in Kansas.
That's true. Some of us have never even been to an ocean here in Kansas, so bear with us.
Anyway, in those animals, it is actually like a feature of the group that they all like have obligatory delayed implantation. And the first time this was ever observed was actually in roe deer in the 1600s. And roe deer, there's like 2 species where this happens. They're the only ungulate it's viewed in. But, basically it's like old-timey English naturalists being like, oh, by golly, they got pregnant way earlier than they're giving birth. What gives? And, I don't know, hunting them and looking at embryos and stuff. So anyway, that was the first time it was ever described.
Wow. That's... So, I don't know. Old-timey English naturalists are kind of dark in that way.
For sure.
Yeah.
Another example of delayed implantation would be in bears. For example, black bears in Pennsylvania mate during the summer, but the blastocyst does not implant for up to 5 months. And then the young are born in winter dens in mid-January. I think bear life cycles are pretty well known with people. But like the piece here that's interesting is that the actual quote unquote gestation, like the period of time where the embryo is growing and becoming an embryo, only lasts 60 to 70 days.
Okay. Yeah, that is quite short.
And it's actually really common in carnivores, like the group Carnivora, that they have really short gestation periods, but delayed implantation. So they can basically opportunistically give birth when the conditions are right and then be like, boom, 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 boom. 1 month, I've got babies. Yeah, I see. I counted.
Perfect. So, okay, with black bears then, they are actually giving birth in January.
Yeah, that's like during their hibernation, right?
Yeah, so they're nursing in the den, and then you have like fairly well-developed cubs then emerging with the mothers in the spring.
Yes.
I think that's true for most bears, if not all of them.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yep.
From what I've seen. I don't know about the weird, obscure bears, but
yeah, that's why I was like most, because I don't,
The weird, obscure
hate to
bears.
ever say all.
Yep. There is no all in nature.
Yeah.
Except for pinnipeds, I guess.
Maybe.
Those are, in case you didn't know, dolphin-shaped dog-looking guys.
Yeah. But kind of seal-looking too.
Kind of seal-looking.
Yeah.
Anyway, in these carnivore species, some of it is to delay, pregnancy in order to cope with long winters. Skunks are a pretty good example. So like eastern spotted skunks have that free-floating suspended animation for about 6.5 months. But then it only takes a month for the young to fully develop when the conditions become right in spring. Yeah. Also, just as a side note, in fishers, which is a much larger, like mustelid animal, kind of like weasels, ferrets, those sort of guys. But in fishers, the total length of pregnancy is equivalent to a blue whale, which is nearly a year long. But the only development happening is in the last 3 months.
That is wild. Okay, so really then, if you're thinking about like an eastern spotted skunk, okay, compared with a Virginia possum has a gestation period of about 2 weeks, I think, ish.
Something like that.
So we're talking about and that's all active like development. You have a eastern spotted skunk that has only a little bit longer, like a month-long development actively, but is producing a much different looking offspring, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, because they're much more highly developed. I mean, they are still pretty wrinkly and pink and gross looking, but they're still much more developed than those little beans that come out of possums.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. And it brings up a question of like, what is the actual benefit of this? because it's really not well understood. An example of what I mean by like, oh, where's the benefit, is that you can have two very closely related weasel species living in the exact same habitat together, and they might have completely different reproduction in this sense. So long-tailed weasels and least weasels are a good example. They live here in Kansas. They can be found in the exact same habitats, but long-tailed weasels have delayed implantation and least weasels do not. And this is a pretty stark difference. So like in the long-tailed weasels, they mate once per year in the middle of summer, and then development happens the next March. So gestation takes a total of 280 days in this species, whereas least weasels, literally in the same habitat, will mate in the spring and summer, and they can mate year round, and gestation takes 35 days and they pop out a baby, or like 13 babies. It depends on 1 to 13. Yeah.
1 to 13. Dang. Okay.
Pull the slot machine.
Yeah. So like the embryo is really developing at a similar rate, a little over a month in both species. But for some reason, the least weasels are mating in the spring and summer and popping out a baby in 30 days. And the long-tailed weasel mates in the middle of summer and waits until next March to actually start developing the embryo. Like, why? What is the benefit of that? And it's really not clear, because scientists will have hypotheses for why this is beneficial to the long-tailed weasel to delay, but like it doesn't explain why the least weasel doesn't do the same thing and has a totally different strategy and does just fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not really clear.
Thoughts on that, Nicole? Hypothesis?
I mean, I mean, it's good to like stagger births. Like if you're two little carnivores probably going after somewhat similar prey, you don't want to both be giving birth in midsummer or late summer or whatever. So, you know, the long-tailed weasel giving birth really early in the spring might be beneficial in that way. But yeah.
I was also thinking maybe them occurring in the same habitat could be a reason why it's different. Like, ooh, maybe it's, I don't know, some sort of resource partitioning or something where they're like, okay, like least weasels are popping out babies. I can't have my babies competing with them. So
Yeah.
it's advantageous to wait, and then I can pop them out a little bit earlier or something.
Yeah. Is that not what I just said? Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it is.
That feels like an actual science answer.
Yeah.
Good hypothesizing.
Yes.
No, it's fine. I was like, was I not clear?
I'm dishing out high fives to both of you, but not on audio because it's too loud.
Great.
Yes.
As a side note, I want to tell you about armadillos because they're super weird.
Yes.
You've hinted at it a couple times.
Yeah. So 9-banded armadillos breed in July or August. And here's a little, well, maybe I should save this for the brain bleach at the end. Okay. Yeah, I'll save it.
Okay.
I have a fun fact about armadillo sex. Anyway, they implant in November, and then 4 months later, the young are born. But when the young are born, they exhibit. This is the word of the day. There's been a lot of words of the day today. I'm so sorry, people. Monozygotic polyembryony.
Ooh, I think I get that.
Yeah.
Break it down for us, Alan.
Okay, so you got one zygote.
Mm-hmm.
Mono. Yeah.
Mono. Yep. Okay. But then you get multiple embryos from that one zygote, which is not like a weird thing in nature. That's how identical twins. Well, well, not fraternal twins, but identical twins come from a single zygote. And it's bloop, and now we're two babies.
Yeah, totally.
But
not weird in nature.
Yes, but it's not just. I don't think it's just two.
No.
With armadillos.
Nope. They have 4 identical quadruplets without fail every time they give birth in February-ish.
It's every single time.
Every single time. And they all have the exact same genetics. They're identical.
It's so weird.
From a single fertilized ovum.
Better hope that those genes are good because you got one chance.
Well, they have 4 chances.
Well, but they're all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. they're all, well, yeah.
So if they all suck,
Yeah, then they're all
go
gonna
down
die.
together.
Yeah.
The end of the line.
God.
Yep.
Oh goodness.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's fun. And then finally, in terms of like embryo, like development control, there's also something called embryonic diapause, which is very, very similar to what we've already talked about with delayed implantation, except instead of being in a placental mammal, it's in a marsupial. So like this is really sort of pulling hairs. Basically, it's only different because like the uteruses of these animals are different. So technically speaking, different things are happening.
Sure.
But, you know, it's basically the same thing of what we talked about. So the blastocyst enters a state of dormancy, and it happens in almost all kangaroos, wallabies, and a ton of other marsupials. And this especially can be very finely tuned to environmental factors. That's extremely well studied, and it's very common in arid regions. And as we know, Australia in particular has a ton of like really arid grasslands and desert-like environments. So those animals exhibit this a lot. A great case study is in the red kangaroo. This has been super well studied. This is an animal that basically continuously reproduces, but the production of each successive baby is modulated by hormones, which is modulated by the environment. And it all feeds into this diapause situation. So it's just pausing whether the embryo is growing because it's like, whoa. There's too many babies on the ground already. So when a new embryo is forming, but there is still suckling happening in the pouch of a current joey, the embryo will pause development for up to 240 days. So the way that this works is the red kangaroo will usually have like one joey, quote unquote, on the ground who's hanging out with mom but not suckling. At the same time, she'll have a little joey in her pouch actively suckling. And almost always while there's those two joeys, she has another little embryo on ice inside her uterus. So by the end of this diapause period, the timing works out that the little on the ground joey is getting kind of like pushed away from mom. The pouch joey is getting evicted and becoming the on the ground joey. And then the pouch is vacant for the new baby to be born. So the timing all kind of happens perfectly, and it's all based on like the body's hormones that are being produced. Yeah, it's kind of complicated and kind of crazy.
I remember this this phenomena in my like in biology textbooks being called the tyranny of the estrus cycle or something. Like, did you come across that term in your research at all?
That's
I think
so
it was
good.
something like that. Yeah, it was like, so it's like because they just have like it's like exact like perfect like command and control of what's going on with their body.
100%. Yeah.
So then, yeah, because you gotta, I mean, yeah, it's weird to have 3 offspring in completely different developmental stages, juggling that at the same time.
Yeah, but it works. And it's just like the way that the system of hormones works. Like the embryo just will not develop until the lease is nearly up on that pouch joey.
You gotta start paying rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what makes this more complicated is the environmental factors, right? So like, if there's extreme drought, which is very common in the place that they live, under those extreme environmental conditions, if the joey on the ground can't find enough grass and other herbage to eat and dies, and if it gets extreme enough that even the pouch joey dies off early, it'll just jumpstart the development of the embryo in the womb and, you know, have another baby right on top of that. So it's like constantly replacing them. So it's not like it's not on a time scale. It's on like a body hormone scale of like, oops, I lost my pouch joey, time to produce another one.
Yeah.
And if things get bad enough that like those pregnancies are continuously failing, she's not lactating anymore, she can't produce her own milk, then reproduction will halt altogether until environmental conditions are better. And that turnaround time is so rapid. Like red kangaroos can have tiny little youngsters in their pouch suckling really soon after a drought finally breaks because the system just pauses and waits until it's right. Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy. So this is like the most extreme example that I know of biological control of how you're reproducing. Those suckling joeys are stimulating the hypothalamus, and it creates a lot of hormone production, which reduces the development and ovulation, suppresses the blastocyst safe uterus, blah, blah, blah. Basically, it's like the ultimate control of how those babies are developing goes to the environment, and then the body just responds in kind and knows what to do with that information. Mm-hmm. It's crazy cool.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Not to mention their tiny nipples and their like 8-inch long ones so they can feed the the joeys on the ground. It's disturbing.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up because the one on the ground is like not completely weaned. Yeah. When it's got a little pouch mate sibling, there's like a long nipple that it can be like.
Yeah. It's a lot. Very long.
It's good information.
And and the different milks that they're all getting. It's wild. It's wild.
Oh, that's right. The different like milk consistencies. Yeah.
Like some of them are higher protein, lower protein. It's crazy.
Oh yeah.
Making multiple milk recipes at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's
finely
impressive.
Tuned machine.
Yes. Finely tuned machine.
For producing babies.
Yep.
Boom, 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 boom.
Yes. Oh, gosh. The final type of reproductive control I want to talk about involves spontaneous abortion. So if you're not interested in hearing about this topic, see you next time. Now, this has been described by a term called the Bruce effect. And I'm just going to preface this whole section by saying this has not been well studied. In fact, I found an entire paper published in 2020 that was like, why are people using the same definition for all these different phenomena? It's been disguising all the other things that could be happening. And I really agree with that paper. That was a pretty interesting paper. So basically the idea here is that sometimes spontaneous abortion of embryos occurs in response to environmental factors. And the main one that's been studied is the presence of other males. So it's like males that either are or are not the father of those offspring, whether they're familiar or strange. Exposure to those males through odor or physical contact can cause the spontaneous abortion of a litter or a single pup or whatever they're producing. Just, I don't know, for theoretically a fresh start is how it's usually hypothesized. Mm-hmm. So this effect, the Bruce effect, quote unquote, has been demonstrated in rodents, several rodent species. It was first described in mice. It's named, by the way, for Hilda Margaret Bruce, and she documented it first in the 50s. And since then, it's been demonstrated in a lot of primates, in rodents, and horses. How do you say the primates that are called geladas?
I think that's right.
Geladas, like gelato.
Oh, now you're making me question it. I never go and like click on the how do I pronounce this? To actually hear it. Take your best guess. And also,
I'm scared.
I want to say it is impossible to read. You know, like they'll have in parentheses, like the little phonetic pronunciation guide. Mm-hmm. No one knows how to use that.
No, I had a friend in college who that was like her degree, and so she knew a lot about how those words worked. Literally nobody else ever should or would know any of that.
Just go like I just want like phonetic, just parentheses. It should be like guh. La, duh.
Yeah,
You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Like just do it. Yeah, with normal letters.
Yes.
I don't need all the.
The
Yeah,
little squiggles and schwas.
it's
yeah.
too much.
Okay, well, it's pronounced. What
Internet-
do you think a D with like a 3 slightly offset means? Do you think that means J? It looks kind of like a Z that's cursive, but it's definitely a 3.
Oh, if it's like a DZ sound, like a J.
J.
Gelada.
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 I'm gonna guess that's it. Okay.
Sure, why not?
Let's start
And if
over.
we're wrong, too bad.
Yeah, buddy. Okay. So, research in Ethiopia on geladas, which is this old world primate, documented that 80% of females terminated their pregnancies after the dominant male was replaced by a new male. And again, the way that's phrased makes it seem like it's a conscious choice. And I mean, we don't really know exactly how these processes are occurring. It's almost certainly just like a biological response that's uncontrollable. So I just want to make that clear. We don't know exactly what's causing this.
Sure.
All we know is that the pregnancies are terminated, and that those terminated pregnancies, those females ended up having shorter intervals between their births. And it's hypothesized, broadly speaking, not just with geladas, that this is to reduce the cost of infanticide.
I was going to suggest just stress, because like this new male's like, muscling his way in, but also infanticide.
Yeah.
Makes
And like
sense, yeah.
it is pretty well studied that in animals, stress in broad terms can cause an increased risk of spontaneous abortion. But this specifically seems to happen in animals where infanticide is likely to happen. So if the males are going to go aggro and just kill the entire litter anyway, it seems like it could be advantageous to just have a total loss of the pregnancy early on before you've invested so much time and energy into those babies. Yeah.
Makes sense, yeah.
So this paper in 2020 that I referenced is called How to Escape Male Infanticide, Mechanisms for Avoiding or Terminating Pregnancy in Mammals. And this author pointed out that there's a pretty widespread and indiscriminate use of the term Bruce effect for any case of pregnancy failure when there's a male introduced, but that there's actually a lot of really distinct both physiological, like in their body, and social causes that leads to the blocking or the termination of the pregnancy. And this is super interesting. I did not know about this. I've heard about the Bruce effect a lot, right? Like this is not a new term to you guys, right?
Is this a new term to you?
I mean, I don't know if I've ever had it named, but like I'm familiar with the phenomenon, I guess.
I'm not
Gotcha.
really that familiar with it. I am familiar with brucellosis, which I'm
Oh.
assuming is also named after Hildemar Bruce, which is a
Probably.
bacteria that causes spontaneous abortion.
Yeah. Well, and so here's what's interesting. Apparently, in her original research, which was studying mice, it was not like a abortion of like an embryo. It was actually a failure of implantation or a pregnancy block that occurred. So basically, it didn't include any case at all of post-implantation failure of the pregnancy. She actually emphasized repeatedly in that research that pregnancy is protected only after implantation. So this is a totally different phenomenon from, like embryos that are growing and then are spontaneously aborted later. It's just like a block of the implantation at all. And so that has some really interesting implications because there's like a whole breadth of ways that this is occurring in animals. So horses were found to have an increased risk of pregnancy disruption after the embryo was implanted. And people called it, evidence for the Bruce effect. It's a very different process that's actually happening. So when a non-father male horse was nearby, it would increase the risk that the mare would have an abortion of her pregnancy. Yeah. And I guess I'll talk about what we know about each of those different types. So it's like the pregnancy block versus, I'm going to call it a pregnancy disruption. So what we know about pregnancy blocks is that this is really common in rodents and has pretty much only been observed in rodents as far as I can see. And this might be really understudied because the likelihood of catching the fact that a pregnancy has even occurred at that early of a stage is pretty low. So basically, like in a house mouse, just having the scent of another male that was not the father of the offspring can activate this endocrine pathway that basically causes the implantation site in the uterus to degrade so the embryo has nowhere to land and grow. So the implantation site disappears, the embryo has nowhere to go, the pregnancy is lost. And this has been documented in a bunch of different rodents. Let's see, I've got a list: prairie deer mouse, collared lemming, several voles, the Vlay rat, the brown rat. Seems to mainly be a rodent thing as far as we can tell. Now, what's interesting to me is that there is an opposite to this effect known in at least one animal, which is domestic dogs. So in domestic dogs, this is the only species documented where when a non-father male is introduced, they were 8 times more likely to maintain the pregnancy than if they were kept with the father. This is a weird study because like the piece that's missing here that is making us like scrunch our eyebrows is that in this study, they set it up so that it was like, they had like a little like home group of dogs. They would take the female out. She'd get pregnant by a stranger and they'd bring her back to the familiar group of animals. And so those familiar males were not the fathers, but being reintroduced to a familiar environment made her 8 times more likely to maintain the pregnancy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. Like it's weird wrapping your head around why this might be the case. If she was kept with the strange male that impregnated her, she was more likely to lose the pregnancy for it not to implant at all. The idea here has to do with like animals being able to mask cheating. And, you know, if she's going back to a familiar group, she can be like, oh, yeah, I'm totally going to have your baby. Have sex with me. Oh, it's definitely yours. I love you. Dogs don't say that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know, that's the idea, is that maybe in a species where promiscuity is less likely to be the case, you can like run off, cheat, come back and feel more safe. Like
because
that.
you have the familiar environment, the familiar animals, constant food, all that good stuff. Yeah, like I feel like that makes sense. Like, 'cause there's a lot of canines that have that kind of like, I'm just gonna wander away for a couple of days. Oh, I'm back. Nothing happened.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, that's the hypothesis for why that's a weird thing that happens.
So did they extend that study in the other direction at all? Like if you had introduced, if they remained with the strange male, or if you'd introduced like a second strange male, would that? I mean, it's like the same general. It's just a matter of familiarity versus, or just like it's like a security.
It seems to be like a security thing. And again, the hypotheses all have to do with like how likely is the male she ends up with to assume that the pups are his.
Gotcha. Well, yeah,
that's the hypothesis. Yeah.
Okay, right.
How male-centered.
I know, that's a thought that I had too. And that's also, what drives me crazy about this. It's like, the only thing that the males, but you know, the males are killing a lot of babies too, so that makes sense.
There's definitely hormonal feedback to feeling safe, though.
Oh,
so,
sure,
like,
sure,
I mean,
yeah.
that probably also plays a role.
Oh,
like,
I'm sure.
Just the stress reduction of it. Yeah, would probably just be like, oh, we're okay. I know who these dogs are. They're, they haven't killed me before. We're all going to hang out together. It's fine. We all get fed. There's people here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right on.
So it makes sense. As far as the other type of pregnancy disruption, which again, I'm calling pregnancy disruption. So that's when it's already implanted, it's growing for a period of time, it's developing, and then the pregnancy has a spontaneous abortion, right? Again, this mechanism isn't exactly explained as far as like what hormones are involved, what pathways are causing this to occur, et cetera, et cetera. Is it just stress? Is it other pheromones from the males or from other females? There's even a whole discussion about like, is it endogenous estrogens or estrogens excreted by the males? Tyranny of estrogens? I don't know. Anyway, there's more to learn here for sure. One interesting example from pregnancy disruption comes from the South African vley rat, which in the wild has two different strategies. The females can either be polygynous or promiscuous, and pregnancy termination varies depending on which strategy they engage in. So polygynous is specifically multiple females mating with the same male. And then obviously promiscuity is just wanton mating with whoever. So basically in this species, the polygynous females almost always experience pregnancy termination when they're exposed to a strange male. That makes sense because they're like dedicated to one male. A new male comes, they almost always terminate the pregnancies in those cases. Whereas in the promiscuous females, spontaneous abortion never occurs when there's a new male introduced.
Wait, sorry, say that again. Okay.
That thinky face.
No, okay.
Yeah. So females that use a promiscuous
Lifestyle.
strategy, lifestyle, yeah. Never experience pregnancy termination when exposed to a new male.
Never. Okay.
But ones that engage in polygynous activities, well, that makes it those who choose a polygynous strategy almost always terminate pregnancies when a new male is introduced.
Okay.
So like, yeah, it's who knows why. I don't know, because that's obviously very different systems occurring in your body that are causing this difference. But yeah, I guess it's adaptable. So again, is it stress? Is it an adaptive response? Is it just trying to avoid infanticide? I didn't look up infanticide in vley rats, but like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I also don't know. Nicole?
Nope. Yeah.
Whoa.
Making it more complicated. In some cases, like several primates, some vole species, the plains zebra, deer mice, physical contact, not just the smell of a non-father male, is likely to cause termination of a pregnancy. In other species, like the domestic horse and the domestic dog, physical contact with the home male, quote unquote, or like their familiar male, not even just the father, but like a familiar male, is needed to continue maintaining the pregnancy after implantation.
Interesting.
Oh, okay. So if there's like any sort of, I guess if you're a species in which there's any sort of like shared or like just like that remains together as a unit, then if they no longer have contact with that familiar male, it's like, well, this pregnancy is no longer viable.
Yeah. And then it isn't, like,
then
literally.
Just dump it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
We said that was not the case with zebras, correct?
No, which is super weird, right? Yeah. I know. It's super weird.
Yeah.
So it's once again probably happening more often than it's actually documented, especially with those early pregnancy blocks, because how would you know when they're pregnant unless you're giving frequent ultrasounds to your little mice or whatever.
Yeah.
But what the researchers of this 2020 study pointed out was that this sort of presumption that pregnancy failure is a single and uniform phenomenon, which has been the case for a lot of, our history of researching this topic, it really discourages further research. And there's a lot of different circumstances and mechanisms that can cause a disruption in a pregnancy, and that those should be studied as if they are separate entities, and that we should seek as scientists to have precision in our definitions. And
Sure.
I mean, that makes sense because
Yeah.
there's obviously a lot of stuff here that's been unexplored or underexplored.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's
Absolutely.
conservation implications for all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotta know how they do the baby making
It is
to
important.
make the babies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
One final study on this topic that I'll bring up has to do with banded mongooses. This is a 2019 study and was one of the only studies I found that involved female on female violence and not just males being at the center of why abortions are happening.
Mm-hmm.
So in this study of banded mongooses, there were 830 pregnancies that they confirmed. This was through like palpating the stomach and doing ultrasounds. So they were specifically trying to like document this, right? Of those, 361 or 43% of the pregnancies were not carried to term.
Wow.
And again, for them, this was a conservative estimate because it does not include any abortions that took place before the pregnancy could be confirmed. And then the main question of the researchers was what was causing this to happen, because it's obviously extremely common in this group of animals. So here's what they found for this species, which has much more, concrete information. There were litter level predictors, so things like rainfall and the density of females breeding alongside them would affect whether the pregnancy was able to continue. If there was low rainfall, that increased abortions. So that's correlated to whether food is available in the form of insects. It makes sense that under bad environmental conditions, they would experience more loss of pregnancies.
Mhm.
But then again, the dense numbers of co-breeding females impacted it too. So when there were a lot of other females breeding at the same time, they would also experience a higher risk of abortion. And this makes sense because there's a huge amount of reproductive competition in this species. It's a species where there are a lot of helpers in the community of animals for those pregnancies. So you're competing not just for resources like food, but competing for other mongooses to help you with your pregnancy. And it can also be extremely violent, like infanticide occurring between females and even eviction of rival females by breeding females in the group. So you could just get kicked out of the group altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So on the individual level, there were also some predictors they found for whether the pregnancy would be successful. Number one was the rank of the female. This was interesting to me because it was not what I expected. The lowest rank female in the social group had the lowest risk of abortion.
Okay.
So if you were the highest ranked female, you were more likely to abort your offspring.
Is that just more stress from being potentially overthrown from your social position?
That's what I assume, honestly.
All eyes are on you. Everybody's
Right.
like, yeah.
Right. It's like being the dominant male chimpanzee. It's just like everyone is hoping for the opportunity to murder you.
Yeah, exactly.
Just waiting.
So, if there's a huge amount of other females around, if resources are slim and you're the highest ranked female, like why bother?
Right.
Yeah, theoretically. The other thing was the weight of the female, and that correlated with the size of the fetus too. So if you were a smaller female, if you were a younger female, you were more likely to experience a spontaneous abortion, especially if you had a very large fetus developing. So this was on an axis of like how large the female was and how large the offspring was. It was very interesting. So yeah, I mean that makes sense too, because fitness of whether you're able to carry a fetus to term, etc., that can be individual too.
Sure.
So yeah, and that's also pretty common in other species like red squirrels and caribou. It's been documented that if you're a lighter weight animal, you're more likely to experience a spontaneous abortion.
Sure.
Yep. And ultimately, once again, like a lot of this other embryonic control, it all seems to boil down to conserving the energy you're investing in those offspring for a time when it's more likely they're going to actually survive, whether it's because of the environment or because of the aggro male or the aggro fellow females that are going to murder all of your babies anyway. Sometimes the conditions just aren't right to have a baby. And the body systems have these various, sometimes extreme ways of responding to those conditions, to pause, delay, ice over. How many? That's a lot of synonyms for the same phenomenon. And straight up terminate those pregnancies. Yeah. So that's just one way in which nature has weird systems of reproduction outside the norm to control when babies are happening.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be that way because, mammals obviously invest an extraordinary amount of resources into a relatively small number of young, and you get multiple chances at it.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Hopefully. Not all mammals.
Some don't,
as we've discussed before, but plenty of them do.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you just made me realize, like with the long-tailed weasel and least weasel thing, the long-tailed weasels are only mating once a year. Maybe that's why they delay until like optimal spring conditions so they can get a head start, because it's like, well, we only have one shot at this. Whereas least weasels are like, we can pop out a couple a year, or if we feel like it.
There you go.
Ooh. Yeah, see?
Yeah.
Oh, it's all so complicated.
It is. You originally, at the beginning of this episode, said it was just like sperm, egg, boom, baby. And then you made it way more complicated.
Yeah, because it is.
Yeah.
Wait till you hear about eggs that are outside the body and can get like destroyed, or if you can delay whether you incubate them so they can develop at the same time or at different times. And like this was just the placental mammals and the marsupial mammals. There's all kinds of other weird baby development things that happen in nature.
For sure.
Nice.
Your mongoose example made me really wonder about meerkats.
Yeah, there are studies on meerkats too.
Yeah, they have a lot of infanticide from other females, and like it's very hierarchical and like,
and
bloodthirsty.
I did pull up a study on meerkats specifically. They do experience known spontaneous abortion in those cases. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head if it was identical to the mongoose, but they were studying it in a very similar way because those social pressures absolutely affect whether young are produced. Honestly, I didn't read it because I was fairly certain you talked about it already because you did a meerkat episode on Best Biome. And I was like, I feel like I've heard this before. So I just like closed the paper, but yeah. It's a mother eat baby world out there.
Yes.
And also a father murder baby world up there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mother drop Joey from pouch to get away world.
It's rough out there.
Yeah. Oh my God, I forgot about that. Sometimes they'll literally just be like, oh, bye, buddy. I've got another one in the chute. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's rough out there. Yeah.
Wild. That's all I got for you guys. Sorry, there were so many scientific terms in that. It's one of those things where, I don't know, there's just not very many normal people language ways to describe pregnancy in that detail, you know.
Layman's terms, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone get out a piece of paper and we'll do a quick vocab test.
Monozygonic.
Polyembryonic.
Go.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other vocab words from this episode?
I mean, yeah, there definitely were.
The Bruce effect.
Yes.
I actually skipped some because I was like, I feel like I'm getting
Interoperability.
too sciencey. Yeah, good stuff. Okay, anyway, somebody do the outro, please. I'm dying.
Oh. All
And
right.
I'll tell you some eye brain bleach.
Thank you, Rachel, for complicating
Pregnancies.
our the very basic understanding of the natural world I prefer to have.
Oh, yeah, you're so welcome. It's a delight.
Yep. All right. Thank you for listening to this episode of Filthy Animals. This podcast is produced by Grassland Groupies, dedicated to spreading scientific literacy in the interest of preserving our favorite natural resources on this filthy planet of ours. Send us fan mail at 4925 S Broadway. The S, of course, standing for South. That is number 69.
Leave that in there. What's wrong with us
We
today?
live in Wichita, Kansas. The zip code is 67216. If you don't send letters the old-fashioned way, you can reach us on social media. Our contact info is in the notes. Oh God, Rachel, give us some brain bleach, please.
Okay, are you ready for
Yep.
this? Okay. The preferred sex position of the armadillo, the 9-banded armadillo, is fairly unusual in the animal world, but not unfamiliar to people.
All right, go on. Go on.
Is it missionary because they have giant shells on their backs?
Armadillos have sex missionary style. The females lay on their backs.
What a strange thing that would be to see. They're still rounded though.
I know.
That would. I mean, do they have to dig a little divot to put the female in?
They could do that really easily.
They could. They're really great at
good at-
digging. Just like, oh, hang on, I'm just gonna get you comfortable here.
Should we look up some armadillo porn real quick to confirm?
Yeah, we should.
Okay.
We should. We're gonna end this episode, but we're gonna Google,
No.
Google
We're
it
gonna get
yourself, people.
live reaction on mic. I'm so sorry. This episode felt really unhinged and really dense.
No,
No, it was
it's very
great.
good. It's
I'm
good.
very pleased with this episode.